This week, I want to reach back into the recent past and present some important Bible teaching from one of our past editions. I think this will be a great benefit to you in your daily walk with Christ. I pray that this encore presentation will bless you and strengthen you for the days ahead.
Yesterday's prophecies, today's headlines. This is the Hal Lindsey Report. And now, Hal Lindsey.
Good evening and welcome to the Hal Lindsey Report. One of the recurring themes of the last days, as foretold by the Hebrew prophets and confirmed by the book of Revelation of Jesus Christ, is the international isolation of Israel. The Bible says that each time Israel faces an existential threat in the very last days, she will find herself increasingly isolated and alone. The prophet Zechariah in chapter 12 says that eventually all the nations of the world will gather together against Israel over the issue of who owns the city of Jerusalem. That prophecy brings together two important facts that help us identify the time in which we live as the time spoken of by the prophets. The first is that the prophet said the Gentile nations will gather against Israel. The second is that the issue that unites them is the ownership of Jerusalem. When Zechariah penned that prophecy about 450 BC, the nation of Israel had not existed for nearly 200 years. The kingdom of Israel fell to Sargon, the Assyrian, around 720 BC. Collectively, they are known as the lost tribes of Israel. Well, they were lost to Zechariah and his contemporaries, but they're never lost to God. Zechariah prophesied that Jerusalem would become a cup that causes drunkenness, literally, to the nations which would gather against Israel over control of Jerusalem. In terms of ownership, in Zechariah's day, Jerusalem belonged to Darius the Great, the king of the Persian Empire. Later, it belonged to Alexander the Great's Greek Empire. Then Jerusalem was made the capital of the Roman province of Judea until the fall of the Roman Empire. Wars raged back and forth over the ownership of Jerusalem after that until the fall of the Byzantine Empire, when the entire Middle East fell to the Ottoman Empire in the 15th century. In Jerusalem's 3,000-year history, it has been destroyed twice, besieged 23 times, attacked 52 times, and recaptured 44 times. So why would a prophecy about a siege of Jerusalem be significant to the last days? Well, because from Zechariah's day until today, the city was never, ever really under Jewish control. But Zechariah's prophecy is for Israel, a nation that did not exist, and over a city the Jews did not control, at some future time when neither of those statements would be true again. Neither of those statements was true from 450 BC until Israeli troops captured the old city in June of 1967. Today we note three significant changes. Israel does exist. Israel controls Jerusalem, and Israel is under siege. Now, at the moment, the siege is primarily economic rather than military. And to this point, not all the world is participating. But look at where we stand in the light of Zechariah's prophecy. Zechariah predicted that those who burden themselves with Jerusalem will be cut in pieces. But that was an observation, not a threat. The British burdened themselves with Jerusalem when they captured the city in 1917. 30 years later, the 400-year-old British Empire fell apart. The quest to settle the question of Jerusalem has intoxicated every U.S. president since Jimmy Carter, at least, albeit some more than others. Bill Clinton and George W. Bush both hoped to put the Middle East peace on their resumes as their ticket into the history books. Their efforts resulted in the loss of most of Israel's military gains over the last 5 decades. That was the logical consequence of holding the insane expectation that extortion on a national scale turns out any better than it does at the individual level. Jimmy Carter and Anwar Sadat burdened themselves with the Jerusalem issue in 1979. Carter lost the White House. Sadat lost his life. Bill Clinton burdened America with Jerusalem, starting with the Oslo Accords in 1993. Nearly 20 years later, America's economy is in shambles. Her military is worn and tattered, her people exhausted, and her foreign policy in total disarray. And Israel, which did not exist from Zechariah's day until about 64 years ago, is more isolated and hated than ever. Increasingly, and particularly since the collapse of the Oslo Agreement, Israel finds her international support eroding even more. Until now, she stands more or less totally isolated and alone and surrounded by mortal enemies. Israel faces existential threats from the ground forces of Hezbollah to the north and Hamas on the south flank. She faces death from above from Syria's huge WMD-tipped arsenal of missiles. Turkey, once her only Muslim ally, has turned into an aggressive opponent. And above all else, Israel faces the deepening threat that Iran will soon obtain and try to use a nuclear weapon to destroy the teeny Jewish state. I'll be back after this message. The reborn state of Israel, by its very existence, is an astonishment on many levels. No nation has ever survived dispersal for over millennia to reemerge at the end of time with its original language, customs, dietary laws, and social structure all intact. There are no Chaldeans today, Amalekites, Jebusites, or untold others of history. All are lost to history. But the Jew remains. The modern nation of Israel should have been stillborn. During the War of Independence, untrained, ill-equipped, and vastly outnumbered Jewish settlers fought off the combined armies of the Arab world, all elaborately equipped with military armor from Russia. Israel shouldn't have survived the Six-Day War of 1967. And even the Israelis themselves were astonished when they won the 1973 Yom Kippur War. The Bible clearly says that God has selected the Jews as his chosen people. Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 2 says, "You are a holy people to the Lord your God, and God has chosen you to be his treasured people from all the nations that are on the face of the earth." Exodus chapter 19, verses 5 and 6 says, "Now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me from all the peoples, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." A heresy has crept into the church that argues that God has unchosen the Jews as a consequence of their rejection of the Messiah, Jesus. This doctrine came to be known as replacement theology. It's the root of Christian anti-Semitism. This heresy survives mainly because Satan has inspired a supernatural hatred toward the Jews, and thus the Israelis. From the moment God chose them, they became Satan's targets. This is why the Lord gave a special promise of protection to the Israelites when he made an irrevocable covenant with Abraham and his descendants. God promised, "I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse." The rise and fall of empires can be traced to God keeping this promise to those who cursed Israel and caused them harm. Recently, a German doctor in Bavaria filed a criminal complaint against a Jewish rabbi named David Goldberg. Rabbi Goldberg is charged with performing circumcision on an 8-day-old Jewish male infant. In Bavaria, it is against the law to circumcise a baby, even for Jews, who are required by their faith to be circumcised, a practice as old as Judaism. Let me add here, there's a lot of things being said about the rituals of the Mosaic law that were given to the Jews. Listen, all of the things that were given to the Jews in the law of Moses about cleanliness, about the way to handle food, about circumcision and things, and washing your hands and so forth, made them the healthiest people of the ancient world. These things had, of course, they were matters of faith and to be obeyed, but they also had practical significances. And so people refuse to do these things at their own peril. It's been demonstrated that people who keep kosher rules about eating are healthier than those who don't. So let's remember that when godless doctors always are finding something that they can disagree with the Bible concerning, even though in the past it's been demonstrated that much of this was valid. As a matter of fact, during the plague, the Jews were singled out as being the culprits that caused the plague because keeping their ritual laws kept them, in many cases, from getting the plague. So they thought, since they don't get it, they must be responsible. Can't win either way, can you? In Austria and Switzerland, circumcision is banned in hospitals. Denmark and Norway have also considered outlawing circumcision. One Norwegian doctor suggested the perfect solution would be to replace actual circumcision with a symbolic ritual. Kosher rules for slaughtering animals are already banned in these countries, as well as others. In San Francisco, and why am I surprised about this place, activists try to have an anti-circumcision proposition entered on the November ballot. Had this proposition passed, circumcising males under the age of 18 would have been classified as a misdemeanor punishable by a $1,000 fine and up to a year in prison. Sponsors of the measure distributed anti-Semitic materials depicting rabbis who perform circumcisions as villains. I wonder what they're going to do with the Muslims. They circumcise men. Nothing's been said about that. And they do a brutal circumcision of women, which has been contested. But if ever there existed a religious system of law that is contrary to the American Constitution and Bill of Rights, it's Sharia law. By the standards of Western civilization, it is a barbaric system. Yet the United Kingdom continues to make one compromise after another to allow the use of Sharia law to settle disputes between British Muslims. The ultimate goal of Islam is to bring all people under the control of Sharia law. According to one estimate, there are already at least 85 Sharia courts sanctioned by Great Britain. But as the British are quick to point out, Sharia law is only used in civil cases. What do they do about honor killings? In Saudi Arabia, an Egyptian woman was involved in a business deal with a Saudi princess that went bad. It was a civil case decided under Sharia law. The Egyptian woman, Nagla Wafa, a 39-year-old mother of twins, was sentenced to 2 years in prison and 500 lashes. The woman will receive 5 lashes a week, every week, for 2 years. Now that's really modern, isn't it? One of the reasons the United States went into Afghanistan was to eliminate the ghastly savagery of the Taliban, especially toward women. But as we prepared to leave, the devout Taliban have reverted to their old ways. Last week, members of a Taliban morality squad raided a dance party at a private residence in a Taliban-controlled area of South Afghanistan. The Taliban does not approve of such things, which it regards as a violation of Sharia law. The Associated Press reports that they slaughtered everyone at the party, and then their heads were cut off. Now, how does the Western media get all riled up about circumcision and have very little to say about cutting their heads off? Last week, the government of South Africa announced that products manufactured in Judea or Samaria and labeled "Made in Israel" cannot be sold in South Africa. A spokesman for the trade ministry said that the government of South Africa only recognizes Israel's 1948 borders as delineated by the United Nations. You see, South Africa regards Judea and Samaria as occupied territories. He added that they do not recognize any changes made to the borders after that date, nor is any area beyond these boundaries considered by his country to be part of Israel. What he failed to note is that there is no such thing as 1948 borders. The UN offered a partition plan in 1947 that the Arabs rejected, so no borders were established, period. In 1949, Israel signed armistice agreements with the Arab nations, ending the conflict of the previous year. But armistice lines are not borders and are subject to change in subsequent conflicts, which there were, and the lines changed. There's no nation more in the crosshairs of international terrorism than Israel. The West is going to pay a terrible price for its cowardly policy of appeasement. It apparently learned nothing from its appeasement of Nazi Germany, just as it emboldened Hitler to reach for more, is doing the same with the radical Muslim nations. The eyes of the world are upon Jerusalem today as never before. Ironically, its name means the city of peace, of which it has known very little. From a human viewpoint of history, it should have ceased to exist centuries ago. Just since 1948, Jerusalem has experienced 4 major wars. By all historical standards, the city of Jerusalem has none of the usual assets that cause great cities to rise. It's not a seaport. It has no natural wealth, no oil reserves, and no particular strategic military value. The important ancient trade routes that connected Egypt and Assyria and Babylon and Persia ran north and south along the plateau of Jordan, bypassing Jerusalem. During its centuries of Muslim rule, Jerusalem became a dusty backwater city, so unimportant that it never even achieved the status of a regional or provincial capital, let alone being the capital city of mythical Palestinian people. Despite its 2,000 years of mediocrity and desolation, Jerusalem is once again the most contended for city on the face of the earth. And most of the world is betting against Israel. Why does the world hate Israel so much? They hate Israel because it consists of Jews who claim that their birthright came by divine decree. The world hates the fact so much that they willingly reject out of hand the political decree that created the state of Israel in the first place, the League of Nations mandate instituted by the San Remo Conference of 1920 through 1922. Yet simultaneously, they defend the sanctity of the Arab borders issued by that same authority, primarily the British Empire that had the mandate to execute the San Remo Conference decree. They hate them because they're Jews. In his word, God explains the purpose of Bible prophecy. In Isaiah chapter 43, verse 9, he issued a challenge to the false gods of this world. Let all the nations be gathered together, and let the people be assembled, who among them can declare this and show us former things. Let them bring their witnesses, that they may be justified. Or let them hear and say, it is truth. The gist of the challenge is clear. God says, here's my evidence. I'll tell you what will happen in advance. Who among your gods will do the same? Since the God of this world cannot prophesy, he cannot countenance the evidence of his impotence. God promised that Jerusalem would be restored to the Jews. After 2,000 years of pointing to that fact, that Jerusalem was not in Jewish hands as evidence of prophecy defeated, suddenly Jerusalem is in Jewish hands. After 2,000 years of pogroms and diaspora, evidence to the world that the Bible was not true, today the Jewish state exists as the Bible said it would. The reaction from the God of this world is evident in the fury of his assault against the symbol of his eventual defeat. The Bible identifies one of the principal signs of the final generation as the existence of a reborn nation of Israel restored to the land that was promised to them. In that generation, the Bible says, Israel will be the most hated nation on the face of the earth. There is no natural explanation for the global anti-Semitism that is bubbling back to the surface of European political discourse. Israel is a European-style democracy. The Arab states are repressive dictatorships. Israel is an economic and financial powerhouse. The Arab states are third world client states. Judaism presents no discernible threat to the safety and stability of the Western world. Islam, the religion practiced by most Arab states, is directly responsible for the terror attacks that have caused the deaths of tens of thousands. The majority of Muslims may not be terrorists, but virtually all terrorists disturbing the world today are Muslim. Even the politics of oil doesn't adequately explain it. There are plenty of alternative oil sources. There are more untapped but mapped and plotted oil reserves in Russia than in the entire Middle East. The only explanation for the rise of anti-Semitism and the antipathy toward Israel is the Bible. God warned that he would judge all those who have appropriated his land and the city called by his name, Jerusalem. He predicted this would happen in the last days. Defying recent history, common sense, logic, and all political reality, we see exactly the picture outlined more than 2,000 years before coming together before our eyes. And just as God predicted, it is all coming together in this single generation. Well, folks, the world is beginning to reject Christianity on every front. So be ready, because I believe the Lord is coming really soon. That's it for tonight, folks. God willing, I'll see you next week.
You've been watching the Hal Lindsey Report. To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also support this ministry online. Visit hallindsey.com or call 1-888-RAPTURE.